Alright everyone, welcome to your daily inversion of reality, link in the description, archived of course, with regards to the Eastpalestine rail disaster. Yes, where Norfolk Southern cut costs and helped cause a derailment that was foreseen by the Democrats according to their hate for Trump's evil train deregulation. They did nothing about this for 2 entire goddamn years, despite having the explicit power to do something about it. But remember, it's all Orange Man's fault. I would like to point out that the response to the East-Palestine rail disaster is partially racial in nature. You have an uber-white community, also working class, largely comprised of Trump MAGA populist voters, and it gets hit with an environmental disaster. Now, under normal circumstances, any significant breach of environmental etiquette gets front page news and gets talked about into the ground by the government because Biden's all about EVs and solar panels, and we're going to invest in cleaner water, and we're gonna clean everything out, get rid of the lead pipes and bury the phone lines, which is a good idea, and all of these other things. But you see them instead punting the issue of the East Palestine rail disaster first for about a week, telling us there's no big problem, it's not even a disaster, no FEMA funding for you, etc., etc. Buttigieg says, oh, well, yeah, I'll visit it eventually. When the time is right, I'll show up. That time just happens to be 24 hours after Trump shows up preemptively. Biden, just the other day, was queried about this disaster and says he has no plans to bother visiting. Well, I've got bigger things to do. I've got to go and give more money to Ukraine or something like that. If this were, let's look at an alternate reality. If this were a largely black community or a majority-minority community, in some part of some city somewhere, and this were to occur, what would be spoken of by the left, by people, by opportunist grifters like Biden and Buttigieg, as well as actual principled leftists? Principles, bizarre as though they may be, they do actually have that ideology. They would immediately have chalked it up to racism. They would have said that the reason why the rail line had this problem is clearly because the rail company is racist. It's obviously run by an evil white male, and they didn't care if the disaster happened in the ghetto. They didn't care if the disaster happened in the BIPOC community. You know that this would be their pitching point. And they would use it as a reason to argue for more regulation. Now they're doing that, but somehow they're not dovetailing it with a racial motive. Nor with the motive of saying, hey, this is an underprivileged community, because they're not allowed to use that in the context of mainly white people. They're not allowed to do that. That's considered politically incorrect. So they talk instead just about regulation. And they don't really give it A1 priority now, do they? Well, again, there's a reason for that. The mystery is that this particular article says that it's a racist canard to point out the demographics of East Palestine and surrounding areas in your analysis of the actual rail disaster. The flip side is actually true. It's not racist to point that out whatsoever, because it plays a role in the response that we've seen by the Biden admin. Again, if this were a good photo op for him, if this were a deep blue county filled with people of color, or whatever the politically correct term is now, Biden would already have been there. He would have taken a goddamn 2-day sleepover there. He would be holding candlelight vigils. He would be making speeches there and saying, well, America will rise to the moment. Once again, we have a major environmental disaster, and my administration is trying to clean things up. I pledge my full support. And he'd be shaking hands and going around stuff. The other part isn't racial, though. The other part's just political. It's political theater. Trump showed up there because it's an overwhelming Trump county. The people there love him. You saw the reaction. It was jovial. Despite the fact that people are drinking contaminated water, Trump showed up and signed their hats and got a McDonald's, so they felt good at the end of the day. Somebody cared. Wasn't Joe Biden, though. Biden isn't showing up for exactly the same reason. If he goes there, he knows he's going to get hardballed, especially at this point because they tried to ignore the issue outright for the first week. That was a tactical blunder. It would have been better to say, well, look, it would have been better to attack Trump on day one. Well, he deregulated the rail. Now we have a major environmental disaster. Quick, pour federal forces into the region immediately. And Biden would have shown up when Air Force One, and he would have given a soaring speech. That would have been the wise thing to do. You don't have to take questions or pretend to care about the poor white bumpkins, but you do have to show, that you're aware that something has happened. But he didn't do that. He punted for too long, and now he's between a cock and a hard place, because now he has two choices. He shows up to a community that is rightfully angry at him for not doing anything, again, for the first week, for effectively, and they're still doing this, allowing Norfolk Southern, which they themselves have blamed in part, other than Orange Man, of course, because they cut corners and they're a shitty company and record profits and all this other anti-corporate stuff that we hear from Biden. But they're letting them clean up the site largely. They're the ones disposing of the contaminated soil and water. They're dumping it all the way in Michigan and Texas right now, by the way. Are they carrying it by rail? Wouldn't that be a grift? They get paid to carry their own contamination away to places in other states. And those lawmakers weren't even told that that was happening. They weren't given the heads up. They were already getting load after load of contaminated soil, and it was sprinkled with a little bit more than just vinyl chloride at disposal sites in Texas and Michigan. Nobody even thought to let the lawmakers know. Why? Because they immediately would have come out and said, hey, no, take it somewhere else. It would be a bit of not in my backyardism, of course, at the end of the day, and there's nothing that they can do about it because the sites were already pre-approved, but they could have talked about it. Ergo, the people would hear about that. And it would be more than a page B article. They couldn't have that happening. Now, if the political winds there were different, if this were a heavily Dem area, Biden would show up because he would get a warm reception. If this were a largely BIPOC area, all of the people in Congress, Dems would be saying, well, look, these rail companies, they don't care about the poor people in these underprivileged non-white communities because they're racist. They want train derailments there so they can poison people. And they would be hyperbolically hyperventilating about the scope of the disaster, too. Oh my god, vinyl chloride, it turns into HCl and it hits water vapor once we burn it, so you're going to get something extra in the rain, too. By the way, those tales about white dust around in the United States, probably not related to the Norfolk Southern situation in East Palestine. I have seen that. Yesterday it was Texas. That's not the way the wind is blowing, though. It's probably just dust. Or it could be pollen. Not 100% sure. Is there a wildfire going on somewhere down in the southern United States? That would probably compensate for it. No, the response there is partially racial, or non-response rather, and partially political. And it's completely incoherent. Nothing has gone right so far there that they've been doing. From, again, allocating the decontamination process to the company they themselves are lambasting, to Biden not bothering to show up, the Biden admin getting hoodwinked by Trump who shows up before they get a chance to send Buttigieg there. Everything has gone wrong with regards to their response so far. Again, link in the description, archived of course. It'll make your head spin when you look at the inverse reality that's being painted by some of the pro-Biden elements of the media. Like this one's from WAPO, so that's a fucking no-brainer. That's about all. Peace out.